You have put together a notion that about 65% of those failures are down to the relationship between the co-founders.
It's funny because when we go into it, people aren't really that surprised. You know, it sounds high, doesn't it? We all know stories of people that have gone through that process and think, actually, I can see where that's come from. But again, it begs the question of, what do we do about it? How do we address it?
Nicki Coe, often known as either the godmother, co-founder godmother or co-founder Agni Aunt.
What I try and encourage in that is an agreement on ways of working, styles even. So, do you want a certain amount of time to work together or apart? You know, how do you both communicate? What structure do you have in place to come together to share feedback with each other, to evaluate roles, responsibilities? So I encourage a really detailed conversation around that.
Welcome to FounderMetrics by Vested, the podcast that delves deep into the anatomy of business triumphs and the strategies behind the commercial success. I'm your host, Ifty Nasir, founder and CEO of Vested, and I'm so excited to take you on a journey into a world of inspiring founders. Nicki, would you like to give us a quick intro to yourself and your journey to where you are today?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Really happy to be here. So, yes, I am professionally known as a co-founder coach, sometimes warmly called the Agni Aunt of the co-founder world, or my clients like to sometimes call me their marriage counsellor or couple therapist, which is a funny but relevant term in lots of ways. So my area of expertise is working with co-founders and business partners to assess any tension, or address any tension as well. A lot of the work is around mastering communication, which I see as a real key pillar of every partnership, and ultimately creating, an aligned vision and plan to move the business forward. Mm-hmm. So that's what I do, and I'm really passionate about that work.
Brilliant. And you're a co-founder yourself, Luna and Lion. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that journey and how that has contributed to what you're doing now, or what you're doing alongside?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been co-founder of Luna and Lion, which is a branding agency, for nearly 5 years now. And I love that work. It really feeds the creative part of my soul. And when my co-founder Scarlett and I started that business, it was a business that for me personally innately needed a co-founder for, because it's creative, and I am more creative when I have someone else to be creative with and have ideas with. And Scarlett and I met through work. She actually used to be my boss. So we had kind of an existing professional respect, which I think, is really helpful in co-founder partnerships. And we've been running the agency for just over 3 years. We started in March 2020. And I personally just experienced a point where, I thought, we're not new anymore as a business. We're kind of not new. So how do we reset the vision? How do we decide what the next chapter is? We've both gone through the pandemic, breakups, babies, moving, all sorts. So there have been a lot of changes, and we've always been really close friends. And that was really important for us. And we started to have conversations about how do we reset the visions going forward? What are our roles? What do we both want from the business? And I personally found these conversations really hard because I really care about Scarlett, about me, about the business. And that conversation is emotional, it's financial, it's about my career, the broader vision of what I want to contribute to, the world around me. So I found those conversations quite hard to navigate, and found myself getting frustrated that I thought I couldn't quite get across my intention, what I wanted to say. So I looked for an expert to come in and help us have those conversations and create a plan from that point. And I couldn't find the expertise that I was looking for. I really wanted someone that had been a co-founder or was a co-founder and really knew the amazing but intense dynamic that can be, and how that dynamic impacts everything for me. Impacted my motivation at work, my daily joy, my stress, my sense of achievement, everything. So, it really is a powerful part that I think is overlooked in business, and I really wanted to then build a business and service to help co-founders really build their awareness of the impact of that partnership, but also importantly learn how to really strengthen it and maximise it and use it as an advantage in their business.
I mean, going into that partnership, you mentioned that Scarlett used to be your boss.
Yeah.
Did you go in as co-founders as equals, or was there a senior subordinate relationship even going into that relationship?
It's a good question, and it's funny because at the time, I didn't really think about it. We'd always been close friends while we were at work.
Yeah.
We're also fairly similar in age. Not that age is the only factor, but I think it's just it's important context for perhaps our dynamic. And we'd had a bit of a gap between being boss and colleague
junior,
to friends. So, we did discuss, at the beginning, we were both co-founders. We both had clear responsibilities and sort of set roles. But I feel like for us, we didn't need to talk about the power dynamic because it had already evolved into something different.
Okay.
But definitely it's a conversation that I have with co-founders. And actually, I work with teams now who have had a similar structure and then gone into being co-founders. And it's not even about saying that I would suggest it always even needs to be equal, but it's about it being discussed and agreed that's important and not being assumed or not agreeing it and then not honouring that agreement. It's a really interesting point.
You talked about the challenges or the journey that you'd had with Scarlett and how that helped inform and actually raise the point that this is something that needs help with. How many other co-founders or founders had you talked to before you thought, actually, this is something that I can help with, rather than just being an observer to your own challenges? It's quite an assumption to think that you can help others.
It's a good question. It's funny, I look back with real gratitude for mine and Scarlett's relationship and our never failing sort of good intention to always do the best for each other in the business, because we did manage to navigate that between us, and obviously now have moved on from there and thrived since. But that question really sat in my head of, what if we hadn't been able to do that, or could we have done that differently, or what can I learn from that experience? And a few times in random conversations throughout life, as is often the case, isn't it, people had said, "Oh, you're a co-founder and you're also a business coach." I've been a business coach for 5 years. I did a diploma while I was working full time, and I've always coached alongside running Lunar and Lion. And people used to say, like, "Oh, have you thought about working with co-founders?" And I just go, "Well, no." But when those seemingly random seeds that were planted before
Suddenly,
sort of come to
absolutely.
light, and I started to have conversations, people, just casually over a coffee, and just say, "Oh, I think there's a real market here to help people with that, and I think I'd be really good at it." I've always found relationships and dynamics of people fascinating, and now I get how important that is in this context. And then I did do sort of a big research project of talking to a lot of co-founders who I didn't personally know, and just being open and saying, "I want to do this work. Can I ask you what your key challenges are, what your experience is, how has it played a role in your business journey?" And the momentum just...
Did you find them quite open to talking to you? They either wanted to pour out their hearts, or were they quite cagey? So it's a very personal relationship.
It was funny. And when I started to begin to share my story, people were like, "Oh, well, she gets it. Yeah. I can say it," because there's that instant sense of like relatability and connection. Because I do think until you've been in a co-founder partnership, it is in a weird way hard to comprehend just kind of how complex that is. And it took a while. Well, it varied, but it took a while generally people to warm up and open up. But then when they did, they had so much to say. Yeah. And they'd say, "Oh, I've never said that out loud before. Or actually, I've not thought about that before. And the impact it's had on me now since, or what do I do?" And then I found that we'd have these conversations that people would say, "Gosh, I feel better even for just having actually said it." But they were left with questions. And I was thinking, well, how can I help answer those questions? But it definitely brought to light for me the idea that people don't talk about this because they feel like they can't, whether it's kind of too personal, but also I get if you're a company, you don't want to necessarily broadcast to investors and such that there's...
Or anybody,
or customers any tension.
So it's a facade that you may well have put together. I mean, going back to what you were saying, I mean, it's so multidimensional, a co-founder relationship. It's not just about the job, as you were saying. It's all those other layers, whether it's personal relationships, friendships, mutual cohorts of people, and it's weaving through that and helping them. That I think is such a powerful gap that you've identified, and I think it's really important. But going back to, let's just pick up on the whole notion that you have, which is around prenups for co-founders.
Yeah.
Now, I guess the thing behind that, and we're all aware that 80, 90%, and the stats vary, of startups fail. But you have put together a notion that about 65% of those failures are down to the relationship between the co-founders.
Yeah.
So can you give me some more insight onto that number and how tangible it really is? Because that's quite scary if it's that high.
Yeah. So when I was sort of part of this initial research piece that I was just telling you about with sort of different interviews and desk research as well, I was really keen to see what literature there was about co-founder breakups. And there's all these stories online of when the breakups happened, like it was the worst thing of my life, and it was this and this and this, and almost used as kind of a not just entertainment, but kind of like a narrative of just building a story around this experience. And I was thinking that's great, but actually people aren't really talking about what's leading up to that or what happened before. It's just how bad it was when it did happen. So I tried to look for some literature around any frameworks or tools that might give insight into what was happening before the breakup story. And Dr. Noam Wasserman, who is out of Harvard Business School, did a research study, and one of the stats from that was that 65% of high potential startups break up due to co-founder fallout. And it's something that I saw and was surprised by, and I've dug into the context of, and it's, being honest, it's kind of elusive in some degrees. Mm-hmm. But for me, I thought actually the power is building a conversation around that stat. And what's funny is, not giving myself credit for this, but since I've started to talk about it, I've seen it pop up on LinkedIn and people kind of discussing it and sharing it. So I think the goal's been achieved, that it's people are talking about that. And it's funny because when we go into it, people aren't really that surprised. It sounds high, doesn't it? But we all know stories of people that have gone through that process and think, actually, I can see where that's come from. Yeah. But again, it begs the question of, what do we do about it? How do we address it? So that's
indeed. And I guess when there's so many dimensions, as you said, so many potentials or opportunities for it to fall short, as it were. But tell me, I mean, how many co-founders have you now worked with? Really hard. It's hard to say, because I do quite a lot of work with organisations and incubators to sort of work with bigger groups. So not to avoid the question, but it's hard for me to quantify. But I intentionally enjoy the mix of working in a deeper level with co-founder pairs, on that kind of 1 to 2. And is it generally pairs, or have you seen triads? Or I'm guessing co-founder is generally 2, but what's the proportion?
Yeah, it's generally 2. I'd say about 90% so far has been 2. I've had the odd 3, but it has been more sort of based on 2s. But I think how I'm trying to sort of view the numbers I'm trying to help, or that perspective is almost in sort of 3 different buckets. Is focusing on that sort of deeper 1 to 2, 1 to 3, work and classic coaching session setup. And then also the bucket of working with organisations and incubators, even like yourself, of actually trying to amplify the message. And then also trying to create content resources. I've got a whole host of workbooks that are free on the website around how to find a co-founder, how to discuss vision alignment, how to look at your roles, responsibilities, all sorts of things. So just trying to give people different levels of access to whatever I can to really help.
So where are they available, Nicki?
On my website, which is www.nickicoe, NICKICOE.com. And they're free to download. And I really believe in that. And I had a situation recently where someone came up to me at an event and said, "Oh my God, are you
Nicki,
the co-founder person?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, what a moment!" But that really is the goal: is people to have access to those and use them and get benefit from them. So.
Yeah. Now, when you get recognised for doing something that you're passionate about, it is really heartwarming. I can vouch for that. So, in terms of the impact that you've had, what we're talking about here today is FounderMetrics, things that help us gauge whether we as founders, co-founders are on the right track, how we need to course adjust, as it were. So how have you assessed your success as a co-founder? If the nameplate number is 65%, plus or minus, how have you gauged the success of your interventions?
I actually was thinking about this the other day because there's sort of an emerging theme that co-founders come to me, and obviously I'm sure a lot of other coaches, you clarify up front what the objectives are, get really clear. And I'm very much an action focused coach, so I really believe in accountability for those. So the objective, for example, is to rebuild our vision and scale a team. Great. So how do we do that? How do we measure that? What are your success metrics for that? Kind of getting really specific into that. So each person's different in that sense. But what I see more and more is that actually the success metric changes as you go through. And not always, but often becomes more personal, people realise as well. The idea of I actually really enjoy this business again. I feel really motivated for this again.
Vested is the leading ShareTech platform. What does that mean? It means we make funding rounds a dream, so you can raise with ease. Our platform helps founders secure investment, scale fast, and succeed. Because companies that raise smart grow strong. So take the stress out of funding rounds and raise with confidence. For more info, search Vested.
Without the second need.
So it's an emotional metric rather than, because the notion of how you see with other co-founders, because you're observing them, how the metrics change or evolve. But I was really wanting to tap into you and how you feel you are succeeding. What I'm hearing is it's more sentiment, an emotional.
Yeah, I sort of see it in almost three bits. So one definitely is the sentiment, and I think the surprising reward they get from that connection piece together, from really feeling like a team again. The other definitely is a business impact. I said each kind of web is different, but that can be securing investment. That can be, I'm working with a team now where that's about launching a new division of the business. That can be, I did one recently where they were looking to sort of restructure their senior team as well. So the metrics can be quite specific, but also quite different in terms of growth and whatever that looks like for them. And then also there's the personal metric of actually how does each individual founder feel, to use your word, the sentiment as well, feel in the business, but also what are their new objectives in terms of the metrics against their responsibilities, whether that's, sales, marketing side. So it varies with each team, but there's definitely a balance there of business output, but also the personal element, which they tend to not be able to articulate until the end of the process.
So then I'm guessing at the end of a process, you will have some sort of feedback loop or form that you... So what is it in that you're looking for that will help you further nuance or evolve your proposition? What are you looking for in that feedback? Or what are the aspects of it?
Yeah. I'm looking for... The words that come to mind for me are clarity and confidence in what they're doing, why they're doing it, and why they are the team to do it. As I said, what work we do to get to that place of clarity and confidence is, really, really varied. But for me, when I, work with a team, those are the elements that stand out for me in that feedback form of being like, okay, that momentum is there again. They're ready to go. And how can I use, because I get quite sort of close to the language in it as well. Like what words are they using? How can I weave those into, to your point, sort of my information up front and make it really clear what it is I'm trying to get those co-founders to. But also being transparent, sometimes the co-founder teams end up breaking up. And what's important to say is that to me, that doesn't mean it's not worked or that there's been any failure.
Not at all.
The first co-founder pair that I coached broke up. And I remember when I had the phone call from one of the clients and just thinking, oh my God.
I've failed.
Oh my God. And then obviously, as a coach, the experience isn't about me. That's not the purpose of it. But naturally, as a human, trying to launch something that I feel so passionate about, it was a really quick and important lesson to think, actually, staying in the business isn't the success metric. The success metric, back to my earlier words, is clarity and confidence in their decision, in what they're doing and why they're doing it. And if that means that they decide to break up, my role there again is to help them navigate that. But sometimes I have been in cases where actually, you know, my gut feel might have been that from early on. But again, that's not my job. My job is to guide them to that confident decision, whether that's, you know, staying, going, growing.
But, I mean, it's in line with the startup mantra of fail fast.
Yeah.
It's far better to close out sooner if it's never going to come to pass. So helping people get to that stage, I think, is important as well, Nicki.
Definitely.
So tell me, what of the horror stories? Tell me one or two of the biggest horror stories. Obviously, there's going to be no names, but how you came into a real mess and what you did about it.
There's only sort of been a couple of situations where I have said, I don't feel like I am the right professional to support the situation. And I use that, I sort of responded to a word of horror story there with that example, because I suppose for me, horror story implies something that feels quite dramatic and traumatic in a way. And obviously my goal here is to always try and help. And if I can't help, then I'll be honest, you know, part of me feels sad about that. I'm frustrated that I don't feel like I can, you know, I can support. But I think sometimes there are cases when actually the individual co-founders need some support separately and before there can be a place to reconcile or to start to reconcile. When I work with co-founder teams, I do a balance of joint and one-to-one coaching because, you know, for me, if I'm trying to build on that identity of us, kind of the third identity, as it were, you know, you, me, us, I need to know the individuals in that dynamic and what they're bringing to the space. But if it feels like perhaps other forms of support like therapy or counselling could actually benefit before those conversations happen, then that's occasionally happened, but it's quite rare.
But it'd be great to just give an example of how you've, you know, something a little bit more tangible maybe, Nicki, where this is what I arrived at. And one way you've chosen to actually work with the team so that people can relate to this is not something that I can't yet help with. This is not an insurmountable challenge. I'm not lost, as it were.
Right, sorry, an example of the co-founder situation.
So that people can relate to it and then think, maybe Nicki can help me. Or
I've had examples before where people have come to me and said, you know, I want to leave. My co-founders suggested that we talk to you as a team, but I don't really see the point, or I just, you know, I feel quite lost, or I feel quite isolated. I think being isolated is a really strong emotion that people don't talk about enough in, you know, this situation, because who do you go to and talk to about that conflict? You know, who do you get to help you? So I've worked with teams that have felt really, really lost. And actually, I think the power of even coming and saying, I want to leave, and my co-founder wants to do this work, that is being honest. That's being really honest there, and I always really value that kind of story. So I've seen teams of when even sharing where they're at with that is a building block to start turning the corner and doing something different. That's definitely one. The other one I've seen that I think is a really important challenge to call out, people can overcome, back to your point earlier, is about power dynamics. And I think some co-founding teams, there's one partner that feels quite sort of swallowed by the other, or, you know, very
overwhelmed.
yeah, definitely. And again, that can feel quite disempowering. You know, you think, how do I resolve that? And that's when a third party can be really valuable to create that equal space for those different voices to come through. So again, that's something I see that, you know, I understand can be really painful for people, but can absolutely be addressed, you know, given the right circumstances.
So let's assume that the co-founders have come into a game together, the journey starts, and, you know, the amount of observable contribution may change. How do you go about helping them understand what those contributions might be and how they might be different, and how to adjust for that? Because if it sustains, if there is a feeling of disproportionate contribution, I can imagine that would be one of those big reasons for breakup. So how do you help with that?
With that, yeah, it's a theme that comes up a lot, as you say, and a first step for me there always is actually awareness of what you're both contributing. A lot of the time that's built on assumption. Oh, they're just sat at home, not doing anything, or like, oh, they do that, but that's easy, that's quick. It's not, a lot of it's just based up on built up assumption of actually what's happening. So some simple exercises like getting everyone to write out their responsibilities, their roles, their tasks. And I often ask people to plot it on a graph of kind of strengths, weaknesses, what I don't enjoy, what I do enjoy, and seeing kind of where does it sit in those quadrants actually. What are you doing that really taps into your strengths and what you really enjoy? And is that, again, perhaps why it feels imbalanced? Like, are you not enjoying the work that you're doing, but you see that they perhaps are, and how can we shift that? It's definitely a topic that comes up.
So having some sort of agreement, as you said earlier, prenup up front.
Definitely.
Do you want to describe one of those prenups that you've
so again,
or worked with?
Very, very sort of unique, as you know, and obviously it's something that I talk about a lot. And for me, I think there's a perception in a way that it's almost, people are worried it demonstrates a lack of trust. Oh, I don't want to bring it up because it's awkward. Like, we're fine, we're a good team, we'll be fine. But actually, I try and frame it that a prenup is a sign of commitment. You're saying, like, I really want this to work.
It's not that you're going to fail and this is how it's going to solve at the end, but
I believe in you
going into
and us. So how do we do that? So obviously there's some of the practical things like, share setup, equity, vesting, sort of those different things and how they unfold. There's also what I try and encourage in that is an agreement on ways of working, styles even. So if, do you want a certain amount of time to work together or apart? How do you both communicate? What structure do you have in place to come together to share feedback with each other, to evaluate roles, responsibilities? So I encourage a really detailed conversation around that. And I've got guides on my website that are free, people can look at to get some ideas as to what to put into those.
Yeah, and then once you've agreed them, you can always put them into reality on vested through the prenups agreement structure that we've got. Going back to then the gauging of your own success now, how are you thinking about evolving the proposition? Let's say, how many years have you been doing the coaching now?
I've been doing coaching for about 5.5 years.
Yeah.
And the co-founder work for about 18 months.
And how's that evolving? What are the lessons that are going to shape how you play over the next year or two?
For me, this year especially is really about amplifying, connections and work such as this, finding ways to really build out a conversation around some of these topics that I think just aren't discussed enough. So a learning actually, definitely for me over the last 18 months has been not just talking about this, but talking about has real power. Yeah. So I am looking to launch my own podcast soon.
Good luck.
TBC,
Good
luck. I run a content series called Confessions of a Co-Founder. So people send in anonymous challenges, questions, situations that range from all sorts of things.
Sounds like a brilliant idea. I mean, once the confessional is open, and some people start hearing what other people have had, gives them the courage to share more. I think that's going to be really interesting to watch and listen.
I run it now as a written series, and I really enjoy it and get a lot of good feedback from it, and thought actually that could be a really powerful conversation piece. So I wanted to do that again to amplify the conversation, to raise awareness of these topics. And my sort of other goal for this year is I'm really trying to build out that literature piece, which I mentioned earlier. There's not really many learnings out there as to how people can do the work now to avoid, or tackle the tension that, that can lead to breakups. So more resources. I'm trying to create my own framework, people to use to build partnerships as well. So focusing on the education piece is important for me.
So how do you, let's say there are hundreds of prospective co-founders out there looking to maybe get your help. How do you gauge your reward without going into the cost pricing? How do you gauge the quid pro quo when you're brought in? Because I guess some co-founder teams may have more resources or funds than others.
How do I balance that?
How do you balance that? How do you decide who you're going to work with? Is it just about the money?
For me, I intentionally have quite a strategic split of my work, of my time in that sense. So I do work with clients on a private 1-to-1, 1-to-2 basis. And I do that in 3 to 6 month packages. The pricing's all sort of open and preset. It's on my website. And then I sort of have a scaling system. So I do a lot of work, said with incubator organizations where I coach co-founding teams free of charge. I do that in exchange because a lot of them are building companies that I really believe make a difference to the world. And this might sound a bit of an odd way to think about it, but I do this work because I genuinely really enjoy it and genuinely believe in the power of it. So I said to myself one day, I was like, well, prove it then.
Yeah.
You know, do it because you can or just because you're getting paid for it. So I really hold myself accountable to that and want to always do this work and remind myself why I do this work, because I see the value of it and because I think it's really important. So I have 2 slots that I offer ongoing basis that I do for different exchange. You know, I get promotion from them and material, but I also don't get investment from them. And then obviously my resources, as I said, are all free of charge. So I do have a very open balance of how I kind of monetize the business in that sense. But yeah, ongoing journey, I'm sure.
Yeah. And do you see at any stage this becoming your main activity? You know, as you said, you've got other activities, a marketing agency, etc. But can you imagine this being something that you'd want to do full time? Or is it literally by being in a partnership as well that you're continually learning, continually able to add to your thinking and resources for others?
It's a good question, and one that I'll openly say is an unfolding answer. But again, Scarlett and I'm grateful. We've had a lot of conversations very honestly about that. And for me, I do believe this year I've planned to do more coaching. At the moment, I do more coaching now than I do the branding work. I see that change evolving still. We've had discussions about what that means sort of in terms of the business and that delivery side. But to use your point, exactly, I feel like my work as a co-founder coach is enhanced because I'm living and breathing that experience. Yeah. So I'd always want to hold on to that. And I do see my brain in 2 halves, where I've got kind of my creative strategy side and my coaching side, and obviously the 2 connect. But I know I'll always want to do part of the branding work because I really enjoy it. Yeah. I really enjoy it. So, but that balance will change, to your point, exactly.
Vested is the best rated ShareTech platform. What does that mean? It means that we make share schemes a dream. And over 90% of our customers agree that their scheme has helped them to retain, recruit, and to lead and succeed. Because companies that share stakes share success. So get them invested by giving a slice of the pie. For more info, search Vested.
Without the second need.
And if you were to think about something that sticks in your mind, you're like every golfer. I'm not a golfer, but I have sort of played, and you know, there's 1 or 2 shots that you think that'll bring you back. Yeah. Are there 1 or 2 examples that you'd be able to share where you felt, I'm so pleased that I was able to help these co-founders?
Definitely, and probably the best way to explain it is by almost talking about what unlocked the change. People can apply that example, you know, to their own partnerships. And one definitely recently was a creative pair of co-founders working in the creative industries. And especially when it's a company like that, obviously it's built really on ideas, opinions, you know, how you bring those to the world. And where I'd seen the tension come was that they started to see their differing opinions and ideas as what was creating conflict. Whereas the lens for me was the unique gold in your co-founder partnership is how you're different, not how you are the same. The fact you have different ideas is what means you can come together and create a different output. So by trying to consistently work against the other's ideas, you're missing out the goal to create something
so
really different.
You're going to trying to neutralise the challenge.
Yeah.
You should embrace the challenge.
Definitely. So that work for me then looked like we created some effective structures to sort of challenge each other and have that collaboration and actually see that creative challenge as not as an act of aggression or defensiveness, but as an act of collaboration. Like, how can we reset that? So that was quite a lot of communication work. So that's definitely one. And another powerful tool that I, again, applies to lots of situations that I work across actually is the idea, which sounds quite simple, but it's the idea of seeing your partnership as a separate identity in the room. You know, I mentioned it earlier briefly, but like you, me, and us. You know, and I've had the us deserves its own nourishment and energy. It has its own perception, especially, you know, in today's market. Your partnership brand, as it were, can really impact
without question
everything. Yeah. So really seeing it all, I'm looking here like this, like it's here, but seeing that as a business asset and how can we try and remove some of the emotional charge to objectively assess the health of that can instantly create space and change the conversation from being like, oh, I feel this because you've said that or you've done that. It's no, this is how I feel. That's what's happening for me. How is that? What does that mean here?
To the brand.
Yeah.
As you say, it's a thing that lives in of itself. Have you? So, I guess with a lot of counsellors, they're taught or trained how to let go of stuff. But have you ended up in a situation where you've heard the co-founders' respective stories, you think, actually, this is solvable, and I've actually become frustrated or really disappointed by not helping them get to a solution? I know we talked earlier, you know, it's better to fail and fail fast if it's not going to work, but have you ended up in a situation where you've seen where and how you can help and frustrated, for want of a better phrase, because you haven't been able to crack that equation or that conundrum?
Yeah, definitely. And you know, I'm only human, right? And I do this work because I really care. So I do definitely have to consistently keep myself in check and be like, how am I caring but serving rather than letting my personal agenda kind of feed into the mix. But yeah, I have. And my response to that is always a mix, I suppose, of gut feeling and professional approach to thinking, you know, sometimes these things just aren't meant to be.
Yeah.
You know, and not to sound blasé about that, but I do believe in that, you know, what will be. And at least the work's been done up front to really test that perhaps it was the right choice for it not to work out, if that makes sense. So in a way, you know, the parties involved can move forward knowing they've tried to put in the work to try and perhaps think of a different outcome. And that's also, again, why I really focus on doing work in joint coaching and one-to-one. So hopefully I do understand what's happening for that individual person, whether or to what extent that's shared with the other partners is, again, it's not my responsibility. Obviously, I'd always encourage openness in that conversation.
Yeah.
But I'd like to think I have an idea of what, you know, of what's going on, but definitely that frustration can be there sometimes.
Well, as you say, you and Scarlett have a few things to discuss around your own independent journeys forward and where you're going with the coaching. But I certainly wish you every success, because I think the endeavour, the work that you're doing is absolutely imperative. We have thousands of businesses on the platform. Most of them have a founder, co-founder dimension to them. And I think there is so much opportunity for you to help great ideas succeed, because if the reason for failure is that relationship and you can fix even a fraction of them, I think that'll be amazing. So good luck with the journey ahead, and thank you so much for joining me today, Nicki.
Thank you, Ifty. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of FounderMetrics. Remember, even the biggest of ambitions are completely doable when you know what to manage and track. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and you'll never miss another one. You can visit us on www.vested.com, where you'll find piles of additional resources, articles and exclusive content. You can also join our thriving community of entrepreneurs and founders by following us on the usual socials and YouTube. Until next time, stay inspired, stay driven and keep writing your own success story.